And hi there, welcome to today's Tech Talk webinar. I'm Douglas Clark, Global Director of Public Relations here at eMarketer. Thanks so much for tuning in today. If you haven't joined us before, Tech Talk webinars are special presentations where we open our studio to guest presenters from the worlds of media, ad tech, and MarTech. The title of today's presentation is Data-Driven Approaches for Account-Based Selling. And joining us today are Nipul Chokshi, Vice President of Marketing at Lattice Engines, a Dun Bradstreet company, and Steve Casey, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Today, they're going to be walking us through how customer data platforms can help B2B marketers prioritize and focus their sales approaches. But before we hear from our presenters today, please keep in mind, you don't need to take notes. You're going to receive a link to view the slides and a full recording of today's presentation after it's over. The topic is very popular, by the way. We have a lot of registrations that include leading brand marketers, and we want you to participate. You can use the window on the lower right-hand side of your screen to submit questions to us. You can send them in at any time, and we will try to get to as many as we can a little bit later during the Q&A portion. So, Nipul, Steve, thanks so much for joining us today. Eager to hear what you have to say, so I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Doug. My name is Nipul Chokshi. I run our marketing efforts here at Lattice Engines. We're a Dun Bradstreet company, and I just wanted to kick off this webinar. Certainly over the years, B2B marketing and sales has evolved, particularly as buyer preferences have changed. New means of engaging with prospects have changed, but through it all, there's been one constant kind of steady, pillar, if you will, that's resided, and that's all about data. And so data has something that marketers crave, especially as we start to embark on account-based marketing and sales efforts that require us to really understand buyers in a more intimate way so that we can engage them with offers, insights, and relevance more than ever before. And so in today's webinar, what we're going to do is really talk about two things. One, what is that shift in terms of the underlying buyer? How are their preferences actually changing? And then two, I wanted to give a couple of examples, talk you through some really practical ways in which companies are adapting to those buying changes and driving very successful account-based marketing and sales programs. But before I do that, I wanted to just get a pulse of the audience. How many of you folks out there are embarking on currently or are about to embark on an ABM program in the next 2 to 4 quarters? And so, we can see kind of what the responses of the audience here, and that, bears itself out, Steve. Almost 80% of the audience, if not embarking on an ABM program now, they will certainly plan on doing so in the next 18 to 20, in the next 2 to 4 quarters. And so with that, let me turn it over to Steve, who'll talk a little bit more about the buyer preferences that are driving this shift towards account-based marketing and selling.
Thanks, Nipul. I think that's really fascinating data because, as you said, our survey data shows essentially the same thing. 80–90% of most B2B marketers today are at either the implementation or definitive plan stage. I think one of the things that was really interesting in that instant poll was how few people, I think it was 6%, who said they had no plans at this point to do ABM. So ABM's real and it's happening, and we're starting on that journey. But what I want to talk with you about today, Nipul teed this up very well. In addition to ABM being a catalyst for improving data management, for better coordination and between sales and marketing as we engage with our target accounts, there's also a few interesting things going on with our buyers. So I want to talk about an additional reason for improving our data management to ultimately improve our account-based sales and marketing. I'll share some data from Forrester's current survey products to give you a real sense of what's the current state. And then we'll talk about what are the long-term implications of this change. And then I'll touch briefly before transitioning over to Nipul to talk about Forrester's perspective on what's changed in the solution landscape. Specifically, what do CDPs represent as a new and different offering for data management? So the short story about why we need to change is that more and more of our B2B buyers are acting like consumers. Just stands to reason. The experiences we all have as consumers every day are having an impact on the preferences of our B2B buyers. There are a number of factors contributing to this. One of the most significant is demographic changes. Digital natives, millennials, there's very little difference in terms of how they engage with companies, brands in their personal lives, or companies in their professional lives as B2B buyers. Giving rise, well, then there's also at the other end of the demographic spectrum are kind of gray-haired boomers like me. We're having experiences, even though it's not native to us, it's a learned behavior. And things like buying a car in a way, pretty high consideration consumer purchase, being able to know what the dealer paid before I walk into the showroom is a far better and more frictionless experience. So it's those sorts of experiences and engagements we have in our daily lives as consumers that are giving rise to something I call the new B2B consumer, who wishes to remain anonymous far later into their journeys. You've probably seen this in your own customer behavior, who looks to, even in a professional setting, even as a B2B buyer, it's really the highly contextual, personalized experiences, the high touch experiences, the emotionally relevant experiences they have with companies like Amazon and Apple that set the bar for the experiences they expect to have from you. They're still part of a team. It's still a long and considered purchase process. If anything, what our data shows is that team sizes are growing and buying cycles are lengthening. But because B2B buyers now have access to so much information, including pricing, and because of a change in many fundamental business models, the move to an annual subscription-based models, B2B buyers aren't that loyal. They're kind of fickle. They act like consumers, and they're willing to shift on a moment's notice if a better offer comes along. So one of the ways we talk about this new persona, and that's one of the key reasons we need to change, because yes, you will always still have a traditional buyer, but now you have this new persona to consider. A persona, a digital first buyer, a B2B consumer, who is more than empowered with the access to information that they have. They're frankly entitled. Again, think about your own experience as a consumer, just as a digital, in your digital life. Content finds you. You curate the digital channels we all engage in to receive and essentially set it up so that the content we're looking for finds us. The same thing is true of your buyers today. They expect the content they need and are looking for to find them in all the channels they engage with you in. This is, however, an evolution. It's not like we've flipped a switch and now 100% of your buyers will never speak with a sales rep again, only engage with you in digital channels and ultimately buy through a digital channel. That's not the case. The pace and the timing and the exact nature of this change will vary by market. It'll vary by offering. So I want to share with you some data, as I said, from Forrester surveys to give you a sense of the technology market, at least. So Forrester publishes a survey every year called Business Technographics, Priorities and Journeys. We survey about 20,000 technology buyers around the globe, and we essentially ask them 3 questions. Where do you look for information during your journey? What types of content do you look for at each stage of your journey? And then where do you purchase? Is it through a digital channel, such as a marketplace, maybe a corporate portal within the firewall, or is it directly from the company website, the vendor website, or does the buyer purchase from a human analog channel, a sales rep? And what our data shows for all of those technology categories, and there are more than 24 in this survey that people can choose from, what the data shows is more than 1/3 of those technology buyers are what I would call fully formed B2B consumers. By fully formed, I mean, not only do they prefer to engage with us in digital channels, they buy digitally, which is a fundamental difference. That's really sort of the end-to-end consumer-like purchase. And if you're thinking, well, I sell a really high consideration product, this probably doesn't apply to me, maybe this is a kind of a procurement buy, maybe it's supplies, I can tell you that's not the case, because I've done some pretty big data projects diving into this data set to look at the differences in traditional versus digital buyers. And what I can share with you, having done this with 2 companies at least, both companies, you'd recognize the names, Fortune 500 companies. One sells we did the survey results, or we drilled into the survey results on their customer experience platform. The other in security software, both of which are traditional high consideration sales, 6-7-figure deals, and the numbers were about the same. Maybe a point or two different, but not materially. So this analysis applies to all B2B products. Technology products, at least for the purposes of this discussion. So here's the data from one of those projects that I did with a client. And 3 things jump out here. So what we've done is we've compared those digital buyers shown in the blue bars versus the gray bar, which is the traditional buyers. And we've keyed on the digital buyer. And one of the first things that's apparent when you aggregate their vehicle or channel preference, their answers to that question, where do you go to look for information throughout your journey? Obviously, it's an omni-channel journey, but it's the digital channels that constitute the first 3 choices. The first most important channel to them, from an initial sort of research, the discover phase, as Forrester calls it, through consideration and exploration, and then through purchase. It's tech vendor websites, number 1. IT forums and message boards to connect with their peers is number 2. And then search engines, all of which are digital channels. Now, look at the gray bars. There is clearly an outlier. For those traditional buyers, there is a very, very strong preference for engagement with vendor sales in person, analog engagement. But that's also still a statistically significant channel preference for even the digital buyers. So as I said, it's not like we've flipped the switch. Even these digital buyers will engage with your sellers. So one of the lessons or insights I think we can gather from this data is that customer journeys are really not linear at this point. We have a new persona to deal with. We have this digital first B2B consumer along with our traditional buyers, but both sides engage in an omni-channel journey. So if ever, I've never been a big fan of this notion of a linear journey where marketing engages with the buyer to a certain point, then hands the baton to sales, who carries the customer across the finish line. I just think that's the wrong metaphor. I think we have a better way to think about it, because those customer journeys are non-linear. Instead, I like the metaphor of a customer dance. I know Nipul and I have had some interesting conversations about this. He really likes the soccer match analogy, where if you've watched little kids play, they all tend to chase the ball rather than play their roles. The way I like to think about it is think about the customer journey from the customer perspective, right? It almost doesn't matter who they're dancing with at any moment, as long as it's all connected and orchestrated. So they'll dance with us in marketing for a few steps, dance with sales, back to marketing, back to sales. Maybe they close the deal. After that point, there are a few more steps with customer success. Some time passes, maybe they dance again with marketing. When we make them aware of a cross-sell, upsell opportunity at renewal, they dance with sales. The point is, from the customer perspective, they're having a connected, orchestrated dance with us as a company. They frankly don't care who the partner is at any moment, but that we've gathered data throughout the dance so that everyone knows what everyone else is doing. That's really why we've increased the need for advanced data management to gain the insights we need so that sales, marketing, customer success, and support aren't stepping on each other's toes during the customer journey, or worst case, stepping on the customers. I'm sorry, stepping on each other's toes. Worst case is stepping on each other's toes. The companies who realize this, who are investing in data management and analytics to gain the insights they need across all their buyer types and personas to understand how to best orchestrate that journey, learn from all the touch points, those businesses are winning. What our data shows is, by a margin of more than 2 to 1, the companies who view data and analytics and data management by extension as a critical priority, those are the companies who are growing most quickly. So let's talk for a minute about the technology landscape. What solutions are available to us to orchestrate that buyer journey, to gather the insights we need to make better business decisions? We've always had an internally developed option, sort of build or buy. That's the story if you've been in technology or been a marketer for any amount of time. This is a familiar movie, right? As new categories emerge, there's typically an internally developed custom option, or now there's the emergence in the form of CDPs as a packaged option. So both groups offer essentially a data management capacity, data integration to integrate first and third party data to give us a unified view of the customer so that we can orchestrate that dance with them. But rather than building an internal data lake and turning to teams of data analysts and data architects to deliver the segmentation and reporting we're looking for as a marketer to understand that journey and report on it, optimize our results over time, the CDP represents a packaged approach, essentially, to do that. I won't spend time weighing the pros and cons. Hopefully you'll have a chance to digest this when you look at the slides after the webinar, but in the interest of time, I'll move on. I'm a visual learner, so as I think about CDPs, it's very helpful for me to use a diagram such as this. I think in terms of hub and spoke. Essentially, you have bidirectional data flows, so pulling in data from all your systems of insight and engagement. Those are Forrester terms for things like your CRM system, your marketing automation system, your sales engagement platforms, trade show software. You're pulling data from all those silos into a central hub for the purpose of building those unified profiles. Here's where we come full circle to this notion about how will we coordinate between marketing and sales so that we can work from the same sort of dance sheet or same music or the shared insights. It's those unified profiles, pulling in that data and then building and getting closer to that unicorn we've been chasing forever, a single source of marketing and sales truth. That's where we're headed. So with that, I'd like to hand it off to Nipul.
Awesome, thanks, Steve. One of the interesting pieces of research that it felt like you can continually cite it over and over here is even though buyers are shifting their preferences, becoming more and more digital first, that doesn't mean the sales channel goes away. And that's certainly something that we've learned as we at Lattice have worked with some of the leading marketing and sales leaders out there. What they're all doing is looking to engage buyers across any channel that their buyers are present and that their buyers prefer. And that's something that, again, that's kind of an aspiration for all of us as marketers in the B2B spaces. We want to be able to engage with, not just kind of the key sponsor, but also all the key influencers and whatnot, who each of them have different buying preferences or at different stages of the buyer journey. To be able to engage them with the most relevant content, with the most relevant CTAs, and so on and so forth. And so to Steve's point, data is something that we've always sought to harness in order to make that a reality, in order to make it so that, the engagement that we do through the ad channel, through the sales channel, through the email channel is all consistent, it's all relevant. And so ultimately what we found customers doing is really leveraging a customer data platform to be almost kind of their pillar, if you will, for their account-based marketing and sales efforts. The idea here is we all as marketers have data in the four corners of our enterprise. There's data that's available via third parties as well. And the idea here is you want to bring it into this single location, to use Steve's verbiage, to kind of create this unified profile, if you will. So you have this 360-degree view of who your prospects are, which ones are most likely to buy, what they're most likely to buy, and when. What are their interests? What stages of the buyer journey are they in? And the idea is to make this available to marketers in a really easy way so that they can then use it for campaign audience creation, and then make those audiences available in social channels like LinkedIn and Facebook, via ad channels, via your website, so you can personalize your web content, via email, and so on and so forth. And so ultimately, what we found, sorry, kind of went ahead there a little bit. So ultimately, as we've worked with Fortune 500 companies of all sizes, companies have really been able to drive and accelerate their digital transformation strategies as a result. They've been able to adapt faster to the sea change in buyer preferences so that they can, in an orchestrated way across marketing and sales, engage with this new B2C consumer, if you will. And in doing so, they've seen significant benefit across a wide range of different types of metrics, right? So whether it's getting campaigns out the door faster, whether it's making sure that you're increasing the efficiency of your marketing dollars spent, whether it's engaging and making sure that you're moving buyers in your target universe across the buyer journey faster, as well as driving pipeline, and ultimately ensuring that sales reps are closing more revenue. And so what I want to do is talk to you about one specific example and just kind of double click and give you a sense of how one customer thought differently, when it came to driving and improving on their business. So TIBCO, in case for those of you who aren't familiar, they sell IT software, including analytics software, business intelligence type software, data integration software, and so on and so forth. And so what they were looking to do was really improve on their strategy, when it came to increasing their share in the subscription revenue space. And they knew that it wasn't just a matter of sending more emails. It wasn't just a matter of having their sales reps cold call into those accounts to kind of say, hey, will you buy our new subscription products? They knew that they needed something a lot more coordinated. They need to be smarter about it. And so they leveraged kind of a customer data platform to help them do just that. And one of the immediate benefits that they saw was when it came to executing campaigns, they found that kind of the long pole in the tent, if you will, was all around the audiences that you had to create. Now, the top diagram here in like the from box, this was actually something that TIBCO themselves presented at a conference earlier this year. I'm sure this looks familiar to a lot of us marketers. When it comes to actually creating a new campaign audience or a list for an ABM program that sales is going to execute on, that your LinkedIn managers are going to execute on, that your email managers are going to execute on, your agency is going to execute on, it tends to be a very arduous process, right? The idea is that once you request that list, you got to talk to your marketing ops person. That person then has to figure out what sources they're going to get the data from. In TIBCO's case, they actually had data not only available through third parties, but then they also had a data lake. And so that marketing ops person would then have to talk to a data warehouse manager in order to be able to extract the data. Then they would need to send that list over to data scientists so that they can prioritize that list. And then they would need to make sure that the list was consumable by LinkedIn so that you can create matched audiences from that. They needed to make sure it was consumable by Marketo or Eloqua so you can send emails against them, and so on and so forth. Inevitably, what wound up always happening is as soon as they created that list, the campaign manager said, well, I don't have enough budget to be able to go after these many people via the ad channel. So can we kind of change the criteria a little bit? And so that whole process started over, right? And so the immediate benefit that they saw of just kind of bringing together all their customer data in a place where, as a campaign manager, as a an ABM marketer, I could just go in and really easily create audiences that just immediately reduced the amount of time it took to create these audiences and make them available to campaigns, reduced it from what used to take 2 to 4 weeks down to hours. And that was a huge benefit in terms of just getting campaigns out the door. Now, what TIBCO did, and the way they were doing things differently here, was they were using a variety of different types of first-party and third-party data to think differently about segmenting their audience. The whole point of account-based marketing, account-based selling, is really all about engaging with your buyers in a more relevant way. And so what they did with this customer data platform was they used a variety of different data attributes that were available in them to help them to create their segments, right? So they would look at things like firmographics, so that would enable them to target companies based on not just industry or geography, right, but also revenue, type of funding they had, potential credit risk, right? They would all layer on top of that technographic details. Now, TIBCO's got a great ecosystem, and so just to be able to customize the messaging and contextualize it, they looked at whether companies were AWS customers, or they had competing products even, right? And so based on those attributes, they would make sure that they would change the messaging up appropriately. On top of that, they also layered in third-party intent signals. So what kind of software are people, actually looking for? What are they researching, right? So TIBCO is a big brand. They sell a lot of different types of products. Rather than just showing an ad that was just about the TIBCO brand, they found it a lot more effective to be able to say, oh, if they're interested in analytics, let me show them an ad that's very specific to the value prop that this TIBCO delivers to their analytics customers. So the whole idea here is they kind of used all of this data in a single place. And so as a campaign marketer, you could be very targeted in terms of the audiences that you create for your campaigns. And the first thing that they did as part of this effort, once they created these audiences, was to actually drive sales outreach. And so the idea here wasn't to just throw a list over to sales, but it was also important to kind of give sales a lot of context and insights around that, right? Why is it that you should actually call on this particular account? How does this account prioritize relative to all the other accounts that you're prospecting into? What do you actually need to know about this account in terms of, what kind of, are they using a competitor product? Are they using kind of a product from our partner ecosystem? Have they visited our website recently, anonymously, or they've engaged with our campaign maybe, right? And then finally, what's the best piece of content that you should engage them with? What kind of objections? How should you handle objections? So it was very much all about being prescriptive and guiding in terms of driving that seller outreach. Now, corresponding to the actual sales outreach, and to Steve's point earlier, the idea here isn't to just sell through a single channel, right? As part of any account-based marketing and sales effort, marketing and sales needs to work together and in concert. And so TIBCO was no different there. As part of their program, they were not just driving sales outreach, but they were also running ads via a variety of different platforms, right? And so that same kind of insights and context that they provided to sales enabled their ads team to be able to really customize and tailor the messaging and the call to action on the ad channel. So the idea here is that the ads served as air cover, in addition to email as well. So when it came to doing outreach against these, against their target accounts, it wasn't just a matter of sales picking up the phone. It was sales along with ads and then marketing emails that kind of supported all that effort. And the idea here is that all of those different tactics leverage the same set of messages, calls to action, achieve that same consistency, so that they were able to effectively engage with their buyers, depending on whatever stage of the buyer journey they were in. Whether it was really top of funnel where they hadn't engaged with the buyer with the TIBCO brand, whether it was companies that, buyers where someone at the company had actually raised their hand and they needed to engage with them, and so on and so forth. And so here, just kind of rounding out this story, you can see some of the results that they achieved. Similar to my slide earlier, that kind of was an aggregate view across all our customers. You can see that there was value that was driven all the way from adoption. So they found that sales was very much readily adopting the recommendations that marketing was making in terms of here are the accounts you need to call on, here's the priorities, and so on and so forth. It improved their productivity. As I talked about earlier, creating audiences, took hours, if not minutes, rather than weeks. And then improved engagement, so their campaigns were a lot more effective, ultimately enabling them to drive pipeline and business impact. And so that's an example, and so ultimately the idea here, again, to Steve's point earlier, it's not just about yes, buyer preferences are changing. It's important to be able to make sure you're incorporating that digital first buyer. But at the same time, as part of any account-based marketing and sales efforts, it's important to be able to make sure you're surrounding the buyers across all the different channels that they might be engaging in. And so ultimately, the key to doing that is really making sure that you've got this 360 view of the customer that's readily available to marketers, so that as a marketer, you can be a lot smarter about your segmentation strategies and your audience creation strategies, ensuring that you're driving the most effective campaigns possible as part of your ABM and account-based selling programs. And so with that, let me turn it over to Doug, who'll be driving us through the Q&A.
Great. All right. Thanks so much. Great information there. We appreciate you sharing that with our audience. It's also great to have you joining us on your first webinar from Dun Bradstreet. So thanks again. Audience, also glad you joined us. They have some great questions. By the way, not too late to send in some questions. If you have any, you can just send them in through that box in the lower right-hand side of your screen. So let's get to the first question now. What are some best practices in getting sales buy-in into these account-based approaches?
I'm happy to take a crack, Steve, if you want to jump in as well. Yeah. One of the things that we've observed when it comes to driving this buy-in with sales is it's show, don't just tell, right? So it's really important to make sure that you're, obviously you want to work with them as early as possible when it comes to deploying any sort of account-based marketing and sales program. Make sure because again, they're more than half of the equation as part of this program. But then on top of that, look to running into pilots, right? Sales reps, what they'll do is they'll look at what their best performing sales reps are doing. And so make sure that, you kind of carve out a pilot, make sure that, kind of the sales reps that are part of that pilot are as successful as possible. And that's what we and our customers have found to be really effective when it comes to helping to drive that buy-in.
I think those are all great points. The only couple of additional points I'd add is what our data has shown in our surveys is that marketers and marketing and sales most frequently engage, and where the tightest alignment tends to happen in the ABM strategy process is around initial account selection. That's a natural, right? Marketers will turn to sellers and look for inputs on who should we target and why. I think that's a good way to go there with sort of open arms and solicit their input. The other thing is, I think, to explain to sellers what we're looking to do is what you're doing already. You're probably engaged, if it's an enterprise sales force, they're engaged in account-based selling. We're looking to essentially mimic that, replicate that, but just do it at a larger scale to give them the context to understand why it is what you're doing, so to help them understand that. But then also, we find it very helpful to target your install base first. If you have the luxury of having a sizable install base, not every company does. You might be a smaller stage startup, you're targeting net new, and that's a different problem. But if you do have, and I guess the presumption is if you're looking to engage with sales, that you probably have an install base that they're working with, to target them with your initial efforts. That's where you're likely to have the richest data already. And engage with I think Nipul put it right, in a pilot, maybe a tiger team approach, find sellers who are really excited about this, because they'll be the ones who are invested in the process. I don't want to be ageist, but maybe there's a demographic component to this as well. You may find a certain cohort within your sales team who's most open to this new approach, but find people who are excited about this opportunity. Target your installed base. You'll have the richest data. You'll have people who are invested in the process, and you'll most likely you'll increase the chances that you'll have early success, which is absolutely key to then establish credibility for then expanding the program out from there.
Great. Okay. Thanks so much. We're going to move on to the next question now. It comes from Peter. He's asking, apart from the use of digital media and tools, how does ABM differ fundamentally from key account strategies which date back decades?
It's not a lot different, to be honest. I stood on stage with my new Serious Decisions colleagues back in October and said, ABM as a term will go away within 5 years because it's really just good B2B marketing. We sell to accounts. What's different today is we have tools to do essentially build these processes at a scale we couldn't before, right? As I've talked about, great salespeople sell on an account basis. They know who's on their buying teams. They're able to generate personalized engagement. Now, as marketers, we can gather more insights. We can read more signals. We can create, through programmatic, machine-driven, automated processes, we can create more personalized engagement at scale. We can target and prioritize based on the data signals we can gather. So in many ways, it's good B2B marketing done at a larger scale.
Great. Okay. We'll send this next one to Nipul. Can you tell me more about the intent data you're using in your examples? Is that available at the contact level?
Yeah. So it depends on what you mean by intent. So when we talk to our customers, intent really gets classified into two categories. There's kind of the first party intent. So people who've shown interest on your web properties. And if you've cookied them, then you obviously have contact level details and data around those. If they're fully anonymous, like it's the first time they're visiting your website, then you can probably you'll likely just get account level data and insights there. There's also third party intent. So this is interest that users are exhibiting on third party websites. And both are really available. If you look at a lot of the third-party data providers that are out there, most intent data providers will provide it at the account level. There are a few, like TechTarget, for example, that are very focused on a specific niche audience. They will provide that intent data down to the contact level as well. So depending on the type of intent, it could be at the account level or the contact level, certainly as well.
Great. We will send this next question to both of you, so either or both can answer. Do you find that traditional B2B buyers are mostly from large enterprises with higher deal sizes, whereas digital buyers are mostly from small and medium-sized businesses with lower deal sizes?
Nipul, I'll let you take a crack first.
Yeah, sure. So based on what we've seen within our customer base and just kind of our experiences, when it comes to the actual, like, I'm going to buy and hit the buying button, we have some of the largest companies that are out there, companies like MSC, Dell and whatnot, selling things through a portal. And so in those instances, it tends to be a single buyer where you're selling through a digital channel pretty exclusively. When it comes to kind of this group-based buying, it tends to be more of a profile where, at one point we actually looked at across our entire customer base, and we found that, if you're doing ABM or account-based selling, generally your ASP tends to be around the $50K range per year. In terms of the product that you're selling. So that's kind of the observation that we've seen, is like 50K is kind of the break point between, kind of the actual, selling to a group versus, kind of a single purchase sale. Now, when you do sell to a group, however, the interactions that your buyers have, like in terms of the research they're doing and all that, that tends to happen digitally, right? But sales obviously is a key channel there when it comes to actually closing that deal as well. Steve, I don't know.
Yeah, just some additional color, not to get too esoteric, but so actually a pet theory I'm working on is accounting for the risk involved in the purchase. It's not necessarily deal size, it's not necessarily digital versus traditional, but if the buyer has the knowledge that would enable them to feel confident, essentially reduce the risk required to make a digital purchase rather than consult with a sales rep, they'll do so. So maybe it's a product they've bought a few times in the past, and they feel like, well, I know as much about this product as any sales rep is going to tell me. Even though it could be a relatively complex purchase, there could be a large number of people involved with it, the ultimate decision or purchase and fulfillment could be through the digital channel. Contrast that with maybe more of a transformational buy, where the buyer it could be a relatively small purchase, they may have a business problem, but really not even understand or know what the solutions are. So their journey, the research they do starts with a business problem. They need to engage with a seller in a consultative fashion to learn about how the vendor can solve their business problem and reduce the level of risk. That is much more likely to take place in a human analog traditional channel.
Great. Okay. Thanks, guys. We have time for just one more question. Comes from Eleanor. She's asking, does account-based marketing seem to be a tactic for obtaining new clients or for improving relationships with and maybe upselling existing clients?
Steve,
go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sure. So we've actually seen it for both, and I actually, the folks that I talk to when it comes to account-based marketing and selling, they often make the fallacy of saying, oh, we're just going to apply this for net new customer acquisition. But we actually find that it's really effective for growing your relationship with existing customers. And it's not just about selling more to your existing customers, but you can actually, we have customers that are employing these account-based tactics to actually reduce churn and turn them into advocates. So this is certainly a tactic that can be employed across the entire funnel.
I'd agree completely. And I wouldn't interpret from my previous answer about targeting your install base first. Really, that's a tactic to prove the efficacy of an account-based approach. That's where you're likely to have the richest data. But it's all about incremental improvement. You can even do a better job on net new, even though that increment may be from a smaller base, right? Because you might not have as much rich data. It's a little bit more of a proxy and more approximation of improvements about targeting and signals and qualification and segmentation. You still can improve the results you're able to deliver. The hit rate might not be as high on the net new side as it is on the install base side, because you're just operating from different levels of knowledge and insight. Let's put it that way.
Okay, great. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much, Nipul and Steve, for joining us today. Great information for our audience, and thanks for answering those questions. Really appreciate it. Before we wrap up, just want to let you know what's coming up across eMarketer's media channels. You can check out and register for upcoming analyst webinars and tech talks. Just go to our website, emarketer.com/webinars. On the audio side, don't forget to tune into Behind the Numbers. It's our daily podcast with host Marcus Johnson. And finally, please check out our eMarketer daily forecast videos that bring our forecast to life. You can see them every day in the eMarketer daily newsletter. So again, remember, you're going to receive a link to view the slides and a full recording of today's presentation. Feel free to share it with your colleagues. We hope you got something out of this today. We really appreciate your time. And thanks again to Nipul and Steve for sharing the information with us. We will see you back here next week on another Tech Talk.